In a previous chapter, we created this model from several individual models and brought them all together and was able to view and investigate the model. But once we have the model here, we're going to need to be able to create some customized views. Now here on the left, you can see in the selection tree all of the individual models that were used to create this one combined unified model. I can actually dive down into specific models and see the layers that make up that individual model. I can even dive down inside that individual layer and see the individual parts that make up that model. I can then actually have the view hide everything except that part so that I can focus specifically on that area. Once I've reviewed that information and made a determination of what I need to do, I can then actually turn that selection off and I can see it now as part of the big picture. So this concept of being able to find elements within a specific model and then identify it very quickly is helpful. But many times we actually need to look at the view itself and find an element that way. We can use the select tool to select a specific element. For example, I have these extraneous lines that are not actually part of the model but were used in the design portion in one of the individual models. I can select that element and automatically my selection tree is going to expand to show me where that specific line is. It then tells me what it's part of and ultimately what layer it's on. Once I've had that, I can hide that one element, or I can even hide the entire layer, and I can begin to customize this view the way that I want. Here's another line that we might want to get rid of, and we can see it's on the elevation layer, and we can hide that layer as well. Finally, it looks like we have a grid. I can right click on that specific layer and hide that layer as well. And now I have a view that is much more conducive to investigating without the extraneous information. So let's zoom in now on the roof area and take a look at some of the other viewing capabilities. As you see, we've got a zoom window so I can zoom in on specific areas. I also have an orbit tool that allows me to orbit the model. I also have an examine, which allows me to spin the model in different ways. I have a fly through tool, which actually allows me to fly around the model. I have a turntable tool to spin the model on the Z-axis. I have a look around, which keeps me stationary but allows me to look at the model from different perspectives. And then ultimately I have a walkthrough tool that actually allows me to walk forward. Now all of these are great visualization tools, but sometimes we need a little bit more information or maybe a little bit different perspective. So one of the tools we have is the third person view. I can actually turn this on and now I can actually see a human-sized figure inside this model, and now I can get a little bit of perspective of how big things actually are. But if you notice, it appears as if I'm walking about 15 or 20 feet above the building. Well, we have some additional functionality once we engage this walking tool, and we can actually turn on gravity. So now as I start to walk forward, you'll notice that I immediately come down to a surface, wherever that might be. Then I can use my look around tool and adjust my perspective. Now I can continue walking and just walk around as if I were in a video game. But now I'm able to see the building in its entirety. Now as I come up to this fence, notice how I'll kind of pass through the fence. And I'm actually not able to pass through right now. If I turn off one of the functions, which is collision detection, I'm going to be able to actually pass through items. Or if I don't want to, I can actually turn it back on, and now I'm not able to. I'm actually coming up to the fence and stopping. This can be very useful when navigating in a building. Traditionally, you're probably going to want it on most of the time to prevent you from walking through a lot of elevator cores and machinery. But for this case, for example, if I wanted to look more closely at a piece of equipment, I might want to turn the collision detection off, pass through the gate, so that I could then focus on a specific area. Now, the other portion of this is that as I get closer to the person, I can see now that I've got a view here that I want to investigate. I can turn that third person off, and now I can just look around where that person was and see the individual elements that I was interested in. So I've got these. I have these valves and this penetrations into this piece of equipment, and I notice that all of these valves are really close together. And I might want to bring this to the attention of the MEP designer. So once I have a view, I can actually save this viewpoint, and we'll leave it as named as view 1. And now I'm able to actually export this view as a JPEG or a bitmap so that I can then maybe throw it in an email and send it to the designer. But because I've saved this viewpoint, I can actually use this to even annotate or place notes inside the view. So you can see that I've got some redline tools here. I might use an ellipse, for example, to draw an ellipse around these valves. I might even want to place a piece of text on top of this and say check clearance at valves. And now this is all part of the same view. Again, I could export this and I could send these valves out. Now this is really powerful and it's a great way to communicate, but I think you would imagine that if I had red notes and clouds and bubbles everywhere, that the model would get very confused or cluttered. Well, by placing this in a view, I haven't actually placed it in the model. For example, if I zoom out, you'll notice all my text disappears. But all I have to do is use my viewpoints, go back to view 1, and all that information is stored there. And this is going to be very helpful later on when we export or publish this model. Now, if I were to ask you where these valves are located, you could probably say they're next to some kind of equipment and they appear to be on the roof. But if there's multiple pieces of equipment and multiple valves, we may not know specifically where we're at. That's where the next tool, creating an animation, can be so important. So let's start by adding we're going to create a new view. This is going to be view 2. We're going to zoom out a little bit here. And we'll create another view. And then we'll zoom out a little bit further. And maybe we'll even pan over just a little bit and change our view perspective. So now we're seeing the model from a little bit different perspective, and we'll save this viewpoint. So we now have 3 new views, 2, 3, and 4. I'm now going to create an animation, and I'm going to place in these viewpoints. View 4 is our start, then view 3, and finally view 2. So now there's our 3 new views. And I'm going to play this animation, but I'm going to tell it to speed up just a little bit. Instead of 55 seconds, let's take 10 seconds. And I'll start the playback. And now we can see that we're outside the building. We're zooming in. It looks like we're on the left-hand side of the power plant as we get even closer. And we're going to finally zoom in right on those valves. So now, imagine if I had placed text or notes in this particular view. For example, if I was to place a red line here and then annotate it, maybe check the clearance or something. Again, I could save this in the view. Now I can send this movie out by exporting the movie as an AVI file. And now I could send this to someone on the design team. Think about how much more information or context a movie gives versus just a single photograph. They say a photograph's worth 1,000 words. I guess a movie's worth 1,000,000. So that's how we can create and customize these views. We've got multiple ways to share them. We can turn individual objects on and off. We can actually save movies and so forth. But ultimately, perhaps we want to share this with the team. Well, I'm going to now publish this file. And it's going to be similar to the process I went through before. This is going to be published now version 2. And I'm publishing it out. And now I'm going to go over to my other tool, which is Navisworks Freedom, our free downloadable viewer. And I'm going to open up that version 2. And inside this, it's the same model we had before, but I've got these viewpoints. And look, here's all the views that we saved earlier. So all of the redlined notes, the movies we've created, everything is all still saved, even though it's in this free downloadable viewer version and still has tons of information.